Now we're starting to get a lot of scanline renders in here, and the comp might be slowing down for you. If you notice that, because we've got a lot of 2D things that are dependent on these 3D scanline renders, if you want to speed these scanline renders up, there's a few things you could do. You could either write them out to disk and then read them back in using the write node with the read checkbox enabled, as we've already explored. In this particular case, the background actually never moves on this because we're just extracting one little slice of the background, and we're not animating the panorama. We're only going to animate the camera. So, you know, for the purposes of while you're working, you could speed this up probably just by turning on caching. So go to the node here and turn on caching, and it'll light up like this. And now it will cache everything, the results of this scanline render in RAM. It'll use more RAM, but it'll be faster. Anything that depends on this will be faster. And you can also turn on full frame processing here. And for the purposes of just interactive tweaking, that should speed this up. I'm going to turn on caching for this scanline render node also, because my admix down here is dependent on it. So that should speed up all of my little tweaks that I'm about to do on my edges and stuff. Now, I noticed that my edge suppression is still not perfect, but more importantly, I'm getting a lot of splotches here. No matter what I do to screen suppress, because this is so grainy, the grains are popping up above different colors, and they're creating a very unsmooth look here. Now, my background is a little soft, or these guys are a little softer than my background anyway. I'm probably going to have to blur the background to match them. So I thought maybe I'll go ahead and drop in a denoise for this also. And I'm going to give this its own denoise, because remember I drove the denoise on the track for the screen extraction quite heavily, and I don't want to denoise this quite so drastically. So we'll be a little more light-handed with denoising this. Make sure you switch it to digital. And I'll just go with the defaults. It seems to be quite a bit more smooth. I'm going to A/B here, you can see that the results are quite a bit more smooth. We won't have as much of that splotchiness, and we're not losing a ton of detail in this either as a side effect of that. So let's look at it down here. Yeah, so we're not getting that splotchiness anymore, which is nice. We're going to have to grain up everything once we render it. So the background has grain in it. And this is a little tricky because it's a huge background. It's a huge background, and it's also a latlong. And because of that, that means that any filter that we apply on here is going to apply unevenly, because these pixels here are a different aspect ratio than the pixels in the middle of frame here. The only square pixels are the ones right along the center of the frame here. All the others are highly anamorphic, and to the point to where at the poles they're, you know, the very bottom pixels pretty much stretched across the entire frame. So we can't just drop a denoise here and have it work as expected. So we're probably just going to have to cope with the fact that the grain doesn't match, or that we have some slightly frozen grain in the background. Maybe we can get away with it because it might just look like texture stuck in everything if we just grain up everything once we render it, or maybe put a little defocus on the background. So let's do that. Let's put a little bit of blur or defocus. I'll do a defocus here on the background to get the feeling of the frame to sort of match that. And then we'll do a little bit of edge blur. They've still got some green in them that we've got to kill. So let's go ahead and, after all of our other grades here, we'll put another hue correct right here. And we want to kill this little last bit of green that's in here. I'm intentionally being heavy-handed just to see so I can see what I'm doing. Make sure that I'm not changing their skin tones much when I do this. And I got his hair, which I didn't notice when I was doing it. That's why it's always helpful to look at it more in context. Alrighty, let's put a little bit of edge blur on it and grain it. The screen suppression's not perfect, but I'm blanking the alpha channel out on this so that down here, just their alpha channel passes through, and I can use that for the edge blur. Just adjust our add mix a little bit before, so I'm viewing at the add mix, and I just want to get the last bits of this annoying edges. Hopefully I can kill these last bits of edges. And then let's check the color match, the overall color match, to see where we're at. The black levels aren't matching. These are more reddish and higher contrast than the environment. So I'm going to push a little bit of this cooler or more neutral. All my screen suppression is crushing their blacks quite a bit. So this stuff all here is all unpremultiplied, so I can put a grade here, and I'm just going to color pick some color from this and put it in the offset directly, which it's a little heavy-handed, but it will do the trick. It'll get the color in, and it'll probably be too flashed, and it may not be quite the right color, but at least I have the right hue, some of the right hue in there. It still needs to be pushed a little bit more blue. And so what I'm doing to match blacks here is I'm just looking at the blackest black I can see in the background here, something like that. And I want to make their blacks kind of match that. And it's going to get really touchy. Not a lot of room, because the lift that you need to put in there is just very tiny amount. And maybe we'll adjust the gamma just a bit too. They feel maybe like they're a little too contrasty compared to the background. Drop a little edge blur on there, so a little bit of edge blur. And so there's a little bit of bluish fringe around here, around his hair still. And then his hair is still a little bit yellow. So these are things that you have to still tweak. But I want to drop some grain on here and just see where we're at. I'm going to use F-regrain. And the only real grain prototype we have in this case is the stuff that came in on the original plate. So let's go ahead and grab that. I'm going to use sampled response, sample grain response. And we're getting some really nasty looking grain here. Red, there's green, there's blue. So it looks like red is really super powerful. So let's reduce the amount of red grain so it's not quite so nasty. And let's shrink it a little bit too. And in this case, we're sort of inventing the grain because since we're putting it over everything, we can get away with kind of inventing our own sort of grain. I actually don't like the sampled response. Let's go ahead and use Cineon, applied in Cineon space. And let's put less grain in the shadows here, in the dark areas. A little bit less in the midtones. And a little less overall there, just to make a slightly less nasty looking grain, but something that still looks like grain. Red, there's green, there's blue. Okay, so we got our basic comp blocked in. Let's put a little animation on our camera. So we can do this, all the animation in the 3D view. So let's do that in the next video.